right, well, good afternoon. I'm Bethany Scruggs, and we're going to be discussing background knowledge and the impact that it has on ELL learners in your classrooms across the district. I'm here today with Shelly Reichert. She teaches junior high. Casey McDowell, she's first grade, and Katie Manuel, and she is sixth grade. So we've all heard about background knowledge, but we're going to go ahead and discuss a little bit about what the difference is between building background and activating prior knowledge. So what have you guys seen in your classrooms with your kiddos, the differences between building background or activating prior knowledge?
I see background knowledge as linking the learning to students' personal, cultural, or academic experiences, while prior knowledge is figuring out what students already know about a lesson or a concept.
I think, speaking from first grade, just dealing with emerging readers in general, whether they're ELLs or English speaking, that's an important lesson component. Obviously, prior knowledge tells us where to go and what all we need to include, but really for ELs especially, just building background, whether that's vocabulary, whether it's text structure, nonfiction, fiction, anything from science material, just things to kind of like you said, with their cultures, and it's really just for all emerging readers at first grade, not just ELs. It's pretty much beneficial for all my students. So
Yeah.
I think it also includes addressing misconceptions that they have with their prior knowledge or their background knowledge, the things that they bring as ideas that maybe they have no foundation for backing that up.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about what a misconception may be that you've seen some of your kids display?
A lot of times I see it with vocabulary, not understanding multiple meaning words, especially. So just having a limited view of what something could be versus more open-ended. But ELL especially, I think that the figurative language kind of comes into play there.
I also see that at the junior high level, but also in dealing with informational text, maybe just the historical context of when something that, especially with all these different news and things like that out there, that there's misconceptions that need to be pre-taught.
One of the students that we're working with now had no knowledge of the Holocaust.
Right.
Which we know about that and we've learned about that, but this particular student had no knowledge.
Right, and in 8th grade we read Anne Frank, and we do some building a background with the general population, but that student is just, and that's kind of like in 8th grade, even though the student may be at 8th grade and a teenager, their gap is much greater than I thought. So so we did deal with that.
Yeah. Whereas in 6th grade, it's pretty common to read Holocaust novels in 5th and 6th grade. So my student, who you'll have soon, will come in with a different level of background knowledge because he was here at that age when it was first introduced in a school setting.
So when you were talking about the misconceptions with words and multiple meanings, it made me think of something I recently read that talked about just the simple word operation. How if we're talking about like a baseball operation, if you are an ELL student and you've just learned operation means like you go to the doctor, but really we're talking about an organization, which is two totally different things. So that's important that we provide background, and sometimes pictures can really clear stuff up just like that. So what do you notice when your students do not have background knowledge on a topic? What behaviors do they display? What do they ask questions? Do they not? Does their participation go up? Does it go down? What do you notice when students do not have background knowledge?
I generally see a lot more off-task behaviors, or just that blank stare. Sometimes they don't really initiate the questions. I have to be the one to prompt and ask the questions. The year I had several ELL students, they would kind of just more listen into what others said, so that they almost seemed like they knew what was going on, but they knew how to wait and listen to others and kind of go off their cues. And so really I had to pry and be explicit in what I asked and what I was saying and what feedback I got from them to kind of even train them of how to ask a question, how to stop me in a lesson when they don't understand. And that was just part of explicitly teaching them how to communicate to me when you don't understand a concept I'm teaching, because sometimes we assume that they will have background knowledge and they don't. So I think that's where there can be that misconception of they just kind of float by and you think they're getting it because they're quiet and they're not asking questions, and that is not an assumption to make of ELL students. So.
Right.
I think it's harder to tell when it's during independent work or like a written response versus an oral discussion. Like specifically with my ELL student this year, his face is easy to read. He's very obvious with his facial expressions when he's thinking about something, so it's easier for me to realize if I said something that's confusing, or if a classmate has said something in a way that confuses him. I mean, I know this is true of all students, but just specifically kind of thinking about him versus on paper or partner independent work. If I just go over and ask, how are you doing? I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Right. You're good at concealing it.
Yeah.
So he doesn't necessarily want to admit it, but his face gives him away.
In addition to that frustration, one thing I noticed that if background knowledge is not built for that student, just the in dealing with reading is the inability to then make inferences, because that's a huge component of what we do in 8th grade or many levels, and if we don't give them that, they can't get to that next level in their comprehension.
So what have you noticed when you talk about reading and making inferences, and thinking of your student in particular, what have you noticed about what he does do? Like like when you ask him, I'm thinking just like the main idea versus details, like
a lot of it's just regurgitation rather than digging in. It's very difficult for them to move, or him to go to the next level of getting evidence to back up something he thinks. If he's working collaboratively in a group, he's very good at masking some of that frustration by either restating what he's heard, which could be a skill that that to use, but to get him to that next level, the background knowledge could have been that bridge.
Right. Yeah, that's an awesome statement, that the background knowledge could be a bridge. I see kids when they don't have the background knowledge, they're often very literal.
Yes.
Like he will just go back and read something in the text, and it might not, like he knows he's supposed to go back to the text,
Right.
but he doesn't have that big picture
Right.
of what he's specifically looking for. He just
Right.
knows he's supposed to find the answer here.
Right.
And mine sometimes pulls random details of he knows he's supposed to go back to the text. It's somewhere within here, but we're not exactly sure what to say, so maybe it's this line. I'll try that and see what she says.
Right.
Processing.
Yeah. So what can we do to provide them, like what can we do to give them that big picture, so when we ask them a question, they know a little bit more of where to go?
We can literally use pictures. You mentioned that to provide that picture, especially with the Holocaust. I mean, or even maybe not images of the Holocaust. Some of those may be a little, too intense. But even if it's an image of a timeline, or something like that, where we could, he can get a grasp of time, a concept of time, or different times in history, or primary source photographs and things like that. So I also thought that in addition to images, some of you mentioned earlier in other conversations about graphic organizers, just organizing thoughts as well.
Yeah, and I think building off of their funds of knowledge of where they come from, just knowing their learning styles, and like we even in first grade can code text by just teaching them how to put a post-it note on. I try to select text that I know they have some background on or that we've built, and so just putting a post-it with a code BK, like they're recognizing I have background on this, and then sometimes they can even bring it into conversation with children in the class, or starring or question marking, like helping them to become independent so that when they're not working with me, they can say, hey, here's a post-it note, I had a question on this vocab word. And so getting them to get a little bit more independent, and then also just valuing the background that they do bring to the text, which is totally sometimes different than what I would bring to the text or even what I would think from a different culture, just different perspectives. It's kind of cool that they know that that's valued, but they also know that it's okay to not know this vocab word, or it's okay if this is confusing, let's mark it, let's talk about it. So even in first grade, getting them to start to become independent with that.
And I like the idea of if you're working with that student individually before the whole group lesson, where you're saying, okay, here's a vocabulary we'll be working with, and giving, having a one-on-one session to provide that knowledge, and then that way they feel more comfortable to be successful in the whole group.
Just building that, and a lot of them, and it's not true of all ELLs, but a lot of the ones I've had have been so shy and reserved that building that background before, like you said, in one-on-one, then they're a little more apt to contribute to the discussion, and then I see them building confidence, and then they're really honed in on what we're saying, and I feel like they participate a lot more and get a lot more out of previewing and building that background before we read or whatever it is we're doing.
That made me think of the video that we watched, how she even had them saying the words. Just be comfortable saying the words so you can ask a clarifying question if you need to, because that is it's confidence that they might not come to the table with.
And that many of their peers who grown up speaking English, still lack confidence with if it's new to them. Because a lot of times I do notice that they don't want to ask a question about a word because they're embarrassed, especially at this age, to say something wrong in front of their classmates too. But you had said something about kind of like comfort level of knowing that it's okay to be confused and that type of stuff, and I think that that's been really important, not kind of reinforcing the fact that not everything is an assessment. And while we're learning, like a lot of times my assignment for many of my small groups for reading, but including this student, is that they have like a working document that they're all adding questions to, that then we use during our discussion, or his job is to add new words to that document, that then we can clarify the meaning of. So kind of using their weaknesses as their goals while they're working, giving them credit for acknowledging those challenges, rather than just giving them questions to answer.
Right.
And you get more information that way as a teacher, to know what next steps you want to look for and teach.
With pronunciation, I had earlier this year, we were reading a book about the Holocaust, and at the end, one of our vocabulary words that we'd been focusing on was rations that people had received in the ghetto that they lived in. And then at the end, they were saved by a Russian soldier. Did not even anticipate that he was going to confuse rations and Russians.
Oh, yeah.
So then there was a written response question, and he gave a great answer, but he answered about the Russian soldier at the end, when the question was to explain why rations were important to the story.
Right.
And so I talked to him, I had never even noticed how similar those words were when you say them out loud. They sound the same. And he just, the spelling didn't matter to him, especially because he had been listening to that section of the book. So pronunciation, I hadn't really thought about that until that moment.
So what happens, we talked about the funds of knowledge that kids come with. What happens when that provides them with a different set of assumptions that they're coming to the text with? How do we value that, but yet give them what they need to succeed? Because a lot of the books, I think a lot of the books and a lot of the stories that we read are written from this perspective that we have. Like my kids, when I taught in Arizona, they would take state assessments and they would have questions about snow. The kids had never left the desert.
Right.
They didn't know leaves changed in the fall. They didn't know that leaves would get crunchy. Didn't know that snow could burn your fingers if you go out without your gloves on. All kinds of stuff. They just they didn't know.
Right.
So when we think about the farm example of what we think a farm looks like is pigs, cows, sheep, corn, and beans. But yet in Arizona that looks something different. In Florida that looks like something different, let alone, in China or the Middle East or Ethiopia. So what is a way that we can bring that knowledge out and validate it, but yet also provide them with the scaffolding that they need to comprehend the text that we're asking them? Have you seen your kids do anything like that? Or
I've noticed that when my particular EL student reads or approaches anything cold, it's unproductive. I mean, it's just, he doesn't get to where he needs to be. I can't think of anything like your example with the farm or the snow, but it's just reading anything unfamiliar, and it can, or just approaching something unfamiliar, like a conversation. Like in 8th grade, we really focus on how to have conversations about text. I use words that may be unfamiliar to him, where for one person would say something, you would comment, you would have an affirmation, like I'll use the word affirmation, him going into a text or a situation cold is just unproductive. And so I guess your question is how to get them from that, or if they have misconceptions from what they bring in, how to bridge that. I don't know, what do you think?
We do in general with my non-proficient readers just a lot of visuals. Sometimes we'll show a quick brain pop video or a video that I find on YouTube, just something so that they have that, and a lot of them are visual learners anyways. But then, like you said before, cold read, just conversation, so that one, I can address misconceptions, and then teaching them that all readers have different perspectives, and the author has a different perspective, and so finding a balance between valuing that and that we all make connections, but trying to then round those connections back to the text, and as you said, I mean, really hone in on what do we want to get out of this text, value that connection, and then bring them back to the text of, okay, now let's look at what the author said and what we can use, and pulling in those visuals to kind of really steer them in the direction that we're hoping that they go. And it's easier for some texts, it's a lot harder for nonfiction, especially if they have no preconceived, any background at all. The biggest thing I would say, speaking more K2, is just visuals. A lot of environmental print, anything, analogies, anytime I can make it to connection of something that I do know that they know about, is usually at least a starting point for discussion and before reading or math.
I like your word connection, because with the new state standards and state testing, that connecting to text that we used to value so much seems to have gone away, and we can't let it go away, especially for our EL students, because making those connections to text is how they're going to get to comprehension.
Yep, it's essential. And first graders in general, and I'm sure it's the same, they're always connecting to self. Text to self connections, that they've got. So getting them to also think of like, hey, do you remember that other text we read? The author had a similar voice, and just they may not make that text to text connection, or they may not know the text to world connection. So we just have to bring that to them. And if we can't experience it in the classroom, like I'll just have my iPad next to me, and if we're reading and they'll, like we came to the word sausage, and I just assumed they would know what sausage was. And so I just pulled up a picture real quick. Have you ever seen this at breakfast? It's a popular food, it's similar, kind of like bacon. And once I showed a picture, it was a flat. I had never seen that, and then I showed a sausage link. And it's like, oh, I've seen that before. It looked totally different, and in the context of the story, it was different. So, again, I would have never thought to build sausage as a vocabulary word, because I just assumed it's a picture of sausage, they'll make that connection. So for me, just having my iPad right there, Google Images, we're going to pull it up, and then they read right on, and we didn't lose the comprehension focus. So.
Well, I think that's one of those things that with building background knowledge, it's not always a planned lesson. It's something that you're reacting to during every lesson, every interaction with a kid. We do it whether we mean to or not all day long when we're trying to explain something that a child doesn't understand, or when we're introducing something new.
So what role, when you talk about that, like when we think about formative assessment, how can you use formative assessment as a way to maybe jump into background knowledge?
I guess as far as planning goes, pre-tests, just to kind of help narrow down your focus.
Let's see here. So what does building background look like in your classroom? When you think about how much time you spend, how much planning time you give to building background, you do it for every lesson. Talk a little bit about that at junior high, 6th and 1st grade levels.
At the junior high, for the big anchor texts, I deliberately plan background if we're doing a novel or a larger text. When we're doing some of the smaller texts, I more do on-the-fly things as well. But I think it looks, it could be as simple as, well, I know I'm reading the Holocaust, so in the weeks leading up, or using different text sets to, okay, so your independent reading for now will be on this. It could be, doing we watched the video of the word sort of introducing vocabulary. Definitely in junior high, not just academic, but content specific vocabulary is something you often see at our level.
And we do the same, build that content vocabulary, and then we do a lot with environmental print, which again goes back to just helping emerging readers. We've got it up in the classroom. We move from labeling things in the classroom to let's turn this label into a sentence, and so just building very basic foundation, and then on from there. Again, lots of visuals, sometimes videos, a lot of analogies. I do, like before a new writing unit, just a day or two, sometimes 3 of just immersion. Let's immerse ourselves in this type of narrative text so that they can just see, am I familiar with any of these authors? What's the style? In math, we do pre-tests, which kind of helps me. I'm a big fan of workshops, so setting goals with students in small, one-on-one conferences, and then I can pull them in a small group and say, okay, I have these students, whether it's an ELL and an English-speaking student, but they're both really struggling with background on this concept, then I can pull them together, and instead of jumping right into the text, maybe we'll just spend a day immersing ourselves in this genre,
Right.
Which you can't always plan for.
Right. And if you don't want to, I don't want to use sacrifice a day, but to allot a whole day. I often see, like, I'll do bell ringers or dailies kind of leading up to that week, to where we'll focus on a skill in a short 10-minute span of time. And that can be visual too. Or the use of picture books when we're doing our, I have a collection of texts that are all about actually immigration. It fits right in this year that he was in my class, my particular year. But a picture book called The Arrival, and it had no words at all. So it just, and that was our first text I introduced him to kind of focus on that major theme. So we do a lot from 1st grade to 8th grade. So it looks like
very similar. We'll do, and kind of like in the video, we might not do words, but just picture sorting. Why would you put these words together? But I'll make sure they're all, like we just, when we do Frog and Toad, things like a swamp and a list, and before we read the story, what does this make you think of? Why would these pictures go together? We can then transition to words. So yeah, kind of the same thing, but just watered down a little bit.
But both of what you said really builds one on the other. Like your 10-minute time builds one on the other, and your pictures to words to concepts just builds and builds and builds up to that framework of comprehension for them. One more question. Can we ever provide too much background knowledge? Let's have a conversation about giving away our lesson. Is that something that we need to think about when we're providing background knowledge for students? Is there ever a time where you wouldn't provide background knowledge?
I'm trying to think, 'cause it's in my area. I mean, I wouldn't give too much about, like, if I was introducing Anne Frank, I wouldn't give away the ending, even though historically most people would know. So if I'm teaching a text, that I wouldn't want to give that away, but I'm trying to, like, apply it to other subjects in middle school. And if we were maybe looking at a math concept, how much do you provide in order for them to solve maybe a word problem, which would probably be quite a beast of a assignment for an EL student. I guess you give enough for, you assess the student, and they can all be different. What's for this particular student may need more background than this one to get to a certain goal, I guess.
One time I can think of really is if you're sometimes within making predictions about something, you don't necessarily want them to understand the topic that they're, or the, whatever the focus is, but you do want to provide them the background of here's what goes into making a prediction. Here's times that we've done it before. So you're setting them up to understand the skill, but not within that particular passage or
so then they can apply it to their next learning.
And I think that goes along with just going into it. What's my purpose of this? Like, I know I've had teachers come to me and say, how much should I give before we do this cold read, because I have to do this assessment, we have to benchmark, we're held to that accountability. Well, for an EL student who's about to read a book, a little quick 2-sentence, hey, here's what you're going to read about, isn't enough. And so the purpose is, I want to see how are they reading fluently, what's their accuracy. You can't assess that when you don't build background. So to me, taking a picture walk and going over vocabulary, that's not giving too much, that's setting them up for, now I can actually see what they do as a reader, and not see the frustrations of, this isn't reflective of you as a reader, this is reflective of you having no understanding of this vocabulary. So again, I think it just goes back to, what is the purpose for what I'm giving them? Because to me, you're not giving too much background in that type of context. Same with math. If there's going to be words that are going to trip you up, and my goal is just to see computation, then I need to give you the background on the language, because that isn't what I'm assessing. It's the number sense. So,
and it could be as simple as going over, like you said, text structure or the format of the worksheet or whatever it is. This is the title, this is a subtitle.
To make sure we know those components so that we can get to what is it that I actually want you to show me that you know. And not be confused by all the other.
And that is incredibly crucial, knowing exactly what you want, knowing where you're going, so then you know where you need to fill in the gaps. Let's see here. Got lots of questions. So, wrapping up, based on your classroom experiences with building background or not building background during lessons, how important is building background to your ELLs? How important is building background to all your students? More important for one or the other? Equally important for all? What do you think?
It's fairly equally, but more urgent for EL and struggling students.
But definitely benefits all.
Essential for all, but being more cognizant that what we would consider as a baseline background for a typical year, we're going to have to dig deeper when we have ELL students, just because they might not have what we would assume that they have, that most students have for background knowledge. So, and being okay to take the time to know that this is, I always struggle with, okay, but I'm going to have to take like a whole day to do this, and then I'm behind on plans, but then I think in the end goal is we're never going to get deep enough and understand it if we don't take the time to do that. So it's so crucial to do at the beginning, because everything from there on out, that's the foundation of
and I think
what we're teaching them.
One thing teachers struggle with is the idea, okay, do I invest this time for one student? Well, yes, because it is helpful for all, because you'll see that payoff in all of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great next agenda. So that's it.
Awesome.
That was easy. Hey, should I go press stop? Okay, get off the camera.
Yeah, I would say they don't even have blooper moments that he can like put it at the end.
You're very good about tying. I would lose my train